Hey everybody, today we're changing struts and rear shocks on a 2012 Ford Fusion, and I've already got one of the fronts done and I'm going for the other side. So basically what we have here, there's a yoke that the strut goes down into. This yoke has to be loosened at the bottom here. There's a nut on the other side, and then there's also another nut here that has to be taken out of the yoke, and that one has to come all the way out. Actually, it's a bolt. The sway bar bolt has to come off as well, and then the strut portion will actually be loose from the yoke once you get that off. And then of course you have to come on the top side. Well, there's a couple other things down here. Number one, there is a clamp for the brake line that has to come off so you can get the strut down through the brake line without disturbing that. And once all that is loose, then you just take the 3 bolts off on the strut or the shock tower and it should drop right down. So I'll try to get a few shots of that while I'm doing it. Okay, I'm going to get some more shots here. This is the bolt right here that I was talking about down at the bottom of the yoke, and this one has to come off, and I've already got it loose. So that should that bolt should slide right out of there. And if you have to, you can apply a little pressure down on the brake or on the control arms, and you should be able to get that bolt right out of there. You can see that I have the wrench on the other side of it, so that's got to come out. And again, the bolt for the tie rod, this bolt for the upper portion of the yoke, and then that should be it. So I'll get another shot in a minute. Okay, I've got the brake line loose from the upper control arm, and there is a sensor that goes in the back of this, and it's kind of like a clip, and you have to take a pair of needle nose and squeeze this clip, and then the line will come out the back of the mounting bracket. Okay, and then finally the 3 bolts that hold the top of the strut in the strut tower have to come out, and that thing will drop right down. So when you get the last one loose and almost off the threads, you're going to want to hold the strut while you're taking the threads off, because otherwise it'll drop, but it's still actually in the yoke. So it's going to have to be worked out of that yoke down at the bottom. And this, the strut shock portion is going to separate from the yoke. Okay, and the yoke will just stay there. It'll rest there, and when you put the new one in, you just drop it down into the top of the yoke, and you'll have to, sorry about the lighting there, you'll have to push the strut up into the holes in order to get enough clearance to get the bottom of the shock into the top of the yoke. Okay. Okay, here maybe you can see that I've got the strut or the shock portion separated from that yoke. Okay, so I'm going to be able to drop this thing down now, and just be careful of the lines and everything. When you're dropping that strut through, it should come right down through by the brake line. Okay, here the strut is out, and I'm not going to show how to compress it because there's enough videos out there on this. However, you know, I do have my spring compressors here, and all I have to say about this is just use extreme caution when you're doing this, because if the compressors let go, you're gonna have some big problems and you could get injured or even worse. The idea is to get this nut off the top of here and make sure the spring is fully compressed, so there's no tension on that nut. And then the other thing that I normally do is when I'm taking this thing apart, or before I take it apart, there's some alignment that has to be made, and I've got one of these paint markers, and I mark the thing at the bottom and then on the bottom of the strut, on the spring, and then on the top, on the spring, and then on this portion, so I get all the orientation correct when I put the thing back in. But you can see that there's a detent for the spring on the bottom, and sometimes they have it on the top, but this piece actually rotates, so if there's a little bit of misalignment, it's not a problem, but it's important that you get the spring down in this area to make sure it's in the right orientation. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take the spring off now, and then get this thing back up in there. So the assembly is just the reverse order of the disassembly. And next I'm going to move on to the rear shocks. Okay, here we've got the spring compressed and the strut out, and make sure that all of your plastics are in good shape, and on both sides as well. So this is a 2012 vehicle, and everything, all the rubber looks good and all that, so we're going to reinstall it on the new strut. And here you can see the front of this thing, and this is where this piece actually goes down in that yoke, and the bolt goes through this detent, and that's why you have to take that bolt all the way out of the yoke. Otherwise you won't be able to get by this detent. Okay, so, and then over here I have my marks on the spring, and you can see my mark on the strut. So I'm gonna mark this one the same way, but you know, actually it's really not necessary, because you know, all of this is basically the same shape. So you can see that the lower portion of the spring will go down on the lowest point of this piece, and it'll actually rest inside this recessed area. Okay, so back to the reassembly. Okay, I've got the new strut assembly up in there, and got a little bit of lighting on it, and here you can see the bolt for the brake line, and this is the yoke that I was talking about, and that yoke goes down to the lower control arm. And over here we have the tie rod that goes into the upper part of the yoke, and this is the bolt that goes through the yoke. And you can see on top of the strut there's an alignment piece that goes down. There's like a gap in the top of that yoke where the bolt comes all the way out of it, and then down at the bottom we've got the bolt on the lower control arm. So that's all. The installation is complete, and I have the nuts tied up on the top, as well as the nut on top of the piston portion of the strut. So that's all on the front. So we'll move on to the rear. Okay, I'm working on the rear shocks now on this 2012 Ford Focus, and the lower shock mount is rather easy to get out. It's just a bolt, and there's a little bit of bracketry that goes through the the lower shock hole. Okay, the top is actually rather difficult. Okay, there's a bracket that bolts on top of the shock, or this bracket bolts up into the body on the car. There's 3 bolts, and they're very difficult to get at. There's not much clearance up in there, but you have to get that down, and as soon as you can get those 3 bolts loose and the bracket, it all comes down, and you can remove the upper bolt.